Please welcome Berejikian of NOAA Fisheries, Beauchamp of the USGS, and Trites of the University of British Columbia. Andrew is going to kick us off. He's going to talk about predation by seals.
Good morning. I'm going to focus here on harvest seal predation on salmon, but I'd be remiss in the harvest would be quite a if I didn't point out that they're not the only ones that have salmon on their breath. All these species that are known to eat salmon at some point, but probably none of them eat as much salmon as seals do in the Straits. Although I do want to point out, I'm not going to talk about it today, but the southern resident killer whales, in fact, all the resident killer whales in Washington State, they prefer Chinook salmon, adults, the big ones. And they're a much bigger player, probably at that terminal stage than what a lot of people may recognize. So I'm going to focus more on the harvest seals, largely because of their potential role in preying on smolt as well as adults. Here, we've got some numbers that were covered by Peter Levia, and we're starting here around 1915 with the numbers of harbor seal, and you see the numbers here were quite low to begin with, and that's because the animals were culled and they were brought down. We think that the numbers today are very similar to what they were before culling started. But for a lot of people, in their memories, numbers were low. As it built up, they were culled again and brought down. But for a lot of people, this is the baseline. This is how the Strait is normal. These are, of course, for all of these seas, a very rapid rise and now a flattening here. And so within British Columbia, there's about 105,000. The Strait of Georgia accounts for about 40% of that, about 40,000 animals. In terms of their distribution, on the Canadian side of the water, this is our perception of how seals are distributed. But of course, that's only half the story. Another half is across the line. And so often I think that the way we approach with the salmon and marine mammals is there is this political border, but as others have pointed out, the animals don't respect that. And I think there is a need to do more coordination, and seeing some of the studies being replicated on both sides. So we talk about a whole system rather than just the graph here showing you the numbers of seals in the Strait of Georgia, starting here around 1971-72. There's very rapid rise and flattening. The best thing in terms of riding the flatness is probably transient killer whales instituting an MSY policy for harvest seals. They're cropping them at a sustainable level. And so that's the best guess. Because we're certainly not seeing any signs of emaciated animals or other signs of animals that have shifted their characteristic due to food restrictions. These are not showing up in the rehab centers. The other thing I want to point out is that across the line, but to add on to this, I'll show you for the Salmon, Puget salmon, as well as the one that Puget Strait, about 14,000 animals. So for harvest seals then within the Salmon Sea region, we're talking about 54,000 harvest seals. It is the highest density of harvest seals in the entire world. Unprecedented. As we look down here, I've tried to place the graph here roughly where the line up with the rate of increase of seals. But I want to point out here, so we're looking at main survival of Coho smolt at the bottom. In this box is the region, at least in British Columbia, when diet was studied. And largely the information that is still used today in terms of what these seals are eating is based on what was collected in the 1980s. So we're already about 30 years out of date. And as I'm going to show you, and some of you have already seen the punchline by looking at the poster by Austin Thomas over here, things have changed a lot. In fact, well, in the past, the seals were eating only about 4% of the diet made up out of salmon. Today it looks to be over 8%. And so the question could be, here we're talking adults, but it is possible for the seals to be effectively keeping the fish, the salmon, in a predator pit, and perhaps even contributing working to prevent us from recovering as rapidly as we should. So just for the diet, this has been the story. It shows up in most of the modeling exercises down to evaluate predation. I think Dave will talk a little bit about his poster and some of his findings here. But we saw here at that time, 8 was the biggest part of the diet, herring and salmon in it very little. Of the salmon is mostly adult, but the species were unknown. And that's because it's relying on identifying the hard parts of the bone. And while it's possible from some of the oldest to identify down to species level, it's extremely difficult to do. So for the most part, all we've been able to say up to just recently, and again I pointed to the poster, but also with his research is getting at the species. Not just the species, but also the proportion of different species in the diet. We know that there is some smoke, and these were 2 regions, where Coho and Fort Moody, there were large numbers of smoke being taken. It's not clear whether or not in these river systems, some artifacts of light shining off the bridges and other structures. But if any of you walk on the Puget River and look at night here between May and June, you can see the harvest field lying on the back like beluga whale straight across, and if you didn't, lifting the fish in the water as they come down. Whether that's an anomaly, we don't know. There's another study that many plant live, and the first somewhat recent diet data, in this case from the San Juan from 2005 to 2008, and it's seen in winter and spring, herring, sandman, northern anchovy, and walleye pollock dominated the harvest diet. In the summer and fall, adult salmon is over 50% of the diet. And I put a citation at the bottom for those of you that would like to get a copy of the paper. And of course, the salmon turns to be far more important in the odd number of years. And so those are when you have the big returns up here. And we're seeing the same thing in the Strait of Georgia. I pulled that figure here from the poster, and the conclusion from a very preliminary look at the diet in the fall, as well as testing some methodology. It appears that the salmon are making up over 80% of the diet. And the poster shows here, and of course most of that, once you break it down over here, there's no pink salmon in 2011. But it's also consistent with the results from the San Juan. In terms of the current predation research, really this is all that's going on at the moment, is trying to get a better handle on the diet, but using technologies that no one had in the past. So not only just getting the species, but also getting down to the proportion. And really it is groundbreaking research, and that's being supported by the Pacific Salmon Foundation. Other research that is in process on harbor seals or yet coming, one is update some of the energetic models for consumption. This work is being run in this case by Sarah Fortune from UBC, and this is funding through NSERC, with Canadian equivalent to NSF, and we have a Canadian Capture Fisheries Network. And so we have some money coming in from the Canadian government to do collaboration between academic, industry, and agencies. We also have here another study that Ben Nelson is leading, also with the same pot of money, trying to do a structured multi-species modeling, focus more on the predation effect on salmon, and so that work is underway as well. And finally, Steve tells me that we'll be doing some aerial surveys hopefully this coming year. And you may notice that I didn't show a graph of the census data from Washington State for the last count, but then it might be heading on. So one is assuming that we'll probably find the same trend should be achieved, but there's nothing more. In terms of the research that we'd like to see done, so in addition to what I'm showing you, I put up 4 studies, actually 2 studies here. The first one here is to do something a bit more directed by capturing and tagging animals. There's some phenomenal technologies now where we can get down to very fine-scale movement to identify foraging patches, the patchiness of the prey, and also looking at trying to find where the hotspot. You can use some tag from the business card tags, perhaps even using PTT tip scanners that are adapted to be carried by the animals to look at encounter rates with marked fish. You can also get better measures of activity budget, things that are needed to improve the quality of the estimate for the The other category put down here is some of the spatial modeling. We also need to look at it in terms of fish moving through a system. It has spatial components. For the most part, the models today assume that just one big deep and everything is randomly mixed even within it. That's not how the river system works. I'm going to show you two quick examples here of the types of things that I think can be done. This is from the state of Georgia and Puget Sound, San Juan area. These are northern fur fields. We're just wrapping up the 5-year study in the Bering Sea, and in this case we're looking at this part here is called a cast dynamic study. So a fine scale understanding of the distributions of fish and the distribution of mammals and how they're feeding. It worked really well because it was an integrated study. And it wasn't just knowing where the seals went, but also what prey was there and how it was living. This is an example of one of these stags that has a 3D magnetometer, a 3D accelerometer. It collects billions of lines of data. And if you just start this animation, you see on here, I'm going to show you from the Bering Sea and up to Coho. This is St. Paul and St. George Island in the middle of the Bering Sea. These are the Aleutian Islands. And we're taking animals here at Beauchamp Island as well as here in Fisheries. Each of these is an individual seal. It's all been tracked here. We're in July. And when we first did this, people thought that the seals were all feeding right along this shelf break where the commercial fishers are operating. And what we essentially discovered here in going through this by reconstructing the swim paths, you can also zoom in and do a 3D motion on this. So I discovered the animals are feeding over a huge area, and their way of foraging was quite different than how we thought. They're not out there looking for fish the way that a fisherman does. They have a very different strategy. We would have never discovered this without having worked with the fish people doing the hydroacoustic system. Let's move on to the next one. And so once we put all this together, we can now pick up the areas where animals are spending most of their time, and we can pick up the distinctiveness of foraging areas between island groups, shoreline areas. You can see doing the same sort of thing here for the Straits of Coho. And the last thing I want to show you on here is, we'll start this in a minute. This is some of the simulation work that Carl Walters was doing. And it's based on almost no data, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. So I take down the right approach here. And what Carl has done here is these are all numbered policies, and we can put various assumptions about how far a seal might prey. And so it's essentially the risk, the entire risk here of the fish being caught because seals are present. And we'll just start this. Essentially, we're now going to dump 200 smokes. We're going to dump 200 smokes into this. Hopefully, that's the thing.
Yeah, it was thought it was running out.
Not going to run?
Let's try it.
There you go. So here we have 200 acoustically pegged smokes swimming out into the strait, and they're making their way out step by step. And what we have here now is that only 2 fish escaped. 177 died, and we still have 21 displaced white dogs here, hoping to get out of the strait. But this is the sort of thing that we can do by putting in real data and to get better insights. But we also need the information on the fish side about the movement of the fish as well. So that's where I can see some of this modeling work going as we try to make this very real. Thank you very much.
Now, Berejikian, we'll talk about predation on steelhead.
Give me 1 minute, sorry.
There you go. Makes me feel a little bit better about what you're about to hear. The work I'm going to be presenting today is really owed to the efforts of Megan Moore, who's been one of the leaders in developing acoustic telemetry data and survival and migratory behavior data for steelhead in Puget Sound. A lot of folks have been working on this, but she's been very successful in getting that work out, and it's going to form the basis of our predation hypothesis for steelhead. No, it's all right. Oh. I'll wait till you're going to get a bunch more in about 10 minutes. Okay, here's mine. Okay, so why look at the early marine survival of steelhead? Well, if you remember back to Dave's presentation yesterday morning, there was a clear peak in abundance in the mid-1980s for steelhead, coastwide and in Puget Sound. And if you look at coastwide trends in abundance for steelhead, they're remarkably similar, all up and down the coast, including the Columbia River Basin, Snake River Basin. We see this decline from the mid-1980s, this trough in the early 1990s, and then subsequent spikes in abundance, all up and down the coast, a very clear pattern. The only place we don't see it, not the only place, but one of the primary places where we don't see that, is in Puget Sound. That signal is muted, and the further south you go into Puget Sound, the further that signal is muted. So it really points to something going on in the early marine environment. Where we have SAR data, it tends to back that up. So there's a real need to look at what's happening in Puget Sound. I don't need to cover this because Aaron did an excellent job yesterday of covering acoustic telemetry technology and how it's used, just to say that all of these data are generated from this type of technology. So the data I'm going to show you now is from 5 years worth of work in Hood Canal, and there are 17 different release groups. That's 5 different populations over this period of time, and some were tagged in some years and some were tagged in other years. But you can see the red dots are the receiver arrays at the mouths of the rivers. The Hood Canal Bridge had an array in every year. Admiralty Inlet from 2008 on, and then the Juan de Fuca array. These were installed by the Post Project. So we can get these segment-specific survival rates using market capture models. So if we look at the percent survival with the error associated with it from the release point to the mouths of the rivers, you can see that it's near 90%. It's higher for wild than for hatchery fish, but I've included them all in this summary. We now go from the mouths of the rivers to the Hood Canal Bridge, and survival is about 70%. They pass under or go around the Hood Canal Floating Bridge, and survival drops to about 40%. And then they're about the same level as they make their way into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and out to the ocean. If we look at the overall survival rate to the Juan de Fuca array at Pillar Point, it's only about 15%. So this type of data can give you a bunch of additional information that's really enlightening, and I think this is just highlighting one piece of information here, and that's the travel times. So this would be something like detection at one array to the first detection at the next array. How quickly can they move between locations? And you can see that with the exception of some outliers in Hood Canal, the migration timing is fairly rapid. This is time in days. This gives it as a travel rate in kilometers per day. As the fish are in Hood Canal, then as they move into Admiralty Inlet, you can see that their travel rates increase substantially. Another metric that's very closely related to this is residence time. And so that would be detection at one array to the final detection at the next array, because sometimes the fish will bounce around a bit. And you can see that the fish are spending very little time in Hood Canal, about 2 weeks on average. And then once they pass the Hood Canal Bridge, they're swimming essentially as fast as they can at a sustained speed to make it to the ocean. Is it going in and out? So about two body lengths per second over that period of time. So they're really hightailing it to the ocean. So if we compare this with Chinook or Coho salmon, we can see that there is a much more rapid migration and probably different factors at play in terms of their mortality. So we can use those two pieces of information, the mortality rates, the estimated, you can calculate instantaneous mortality rate, and use that timing information to just generate a simple survivorship curve here. So I started with a hypothetical population of 5,000 smolts, and after that first 3 weeks, we're down to about 860 fish. If you use about a 3% smolt to adult survival rate to generate the number of survivors that returns from this many smolts, you can see what happens to that curve. Now, we can think of a number of reasons why we might be underestimating survival. We can't think of any reasons why we might be overestimating it. So things like potentially tag loss, temporary or longer-term losses in the array, the dinner bell thing, which you can ask me about afterwards. All of these would cause us to underestimate survival. So even if you were to say, all right, we've underestimated by half, the survivorship curve still doesn't look good. So what about potential hotspots? And if we take some of the recent data that Megan has generated here and look at an instantaneous mortality rate, not in terms of per unit time, but in terms of distance, so the percent mortality per, say, kilometer of travel, you can see that for these various populations, it's fairly low for the river mouth to Hood Canal Bridge segment, and substantially and significantly higher in Admiralty Inlet. And we may have gotten some clues about why that might be the case yesterday with some of the mixing patterns and some of that information, why things are different here. The problem is that we can't disassociate the mortality here from what's going on at the Hood Canal Bridge, because the data also suggests that there's mortality associated with the bridge. Tags that are ticking essentially have been deposited on the seafloor underneath the bridge. So we can't disentangle those two, but you can see how the data can generate these potential hypotheses about where mortality is occurring. So what are the sources of steelhead mortality? It's possible that the fish are going uncompromised. We don't see any sign of that. There was an interesting study by Balfour et al. Up in BC where they vaccinated against things like Vibrio and found a slightly higher survival, but the sample sizes there were small, and this might be something that we need to look at further. Competition over this period of time is probably not functioning the same way that we heard described for Chinook salmon or Coho salmon. Harmful algal blooms, we heard a bit about that yesterday. If this were an emphasis, I would expect to see more variation among release locations, among release dates within years, and among years than we see. We see really consistent patterns in the telemetry data. So predation is our most likely hypothesis for what's getting these guys as they leave. So predation on otherwise healthy fish, I guess, is our hypothesis. A number of predators. Harbor porpoise, I don't know anything about harbor porpoise or harbor seals for that matter, but I've been told that harbor porpoise are increasing in abundance in Admiralty Inlet in particular and further south into Puget Sound. And as Steve mentioned yesterday to me, that it may be that it's just simply a redistribution, but we don't know at this point. Maybe there are more of them. Harbor seals, this is the graphic I think Andrew referred to. This is the last census that was taken in 1999, showing that increase and then potentially a leveling off. So we're focusing here then on harbor seals, and again, I'm glad to hear the talk yesterday. Maybe not too far off base, at least worth looking at. So the approach would be to analyze all of the Puget Sound telemetry information, and that's underway. All of the various groups that have been involved in this are getting together to do one meta-analysis, identify potential hotspots. That's the first most important step. Conduct the surveys, and glad to hear that that's going forward. And then we could establish receiver arrays near these likely hotspots based on those harbor seal surveys and the telemetry data, and then conduct this concurrent tagging of harbor seals and steelhead in a systematic way that really pinpoints the potential for these encounters and predation rates. So the data can generate the spatial overlap, and again, Andrew showed this much more eloquently than I am doing here with words, but the spatial overlap and then spatial and temporal overlap by concurrent pings on these fixed arrays. Potential encounters would be pings detected on these mobile seal-mounted receivers, and then the putative predation events would be these recurring continuous pings on seal-mounted receivers, potentially followed by stationary tags if the seals might swim over. So So it's kind of taking, this type of work has been done on centipeds, kind of just looking for tags out there. This would be a much more focused approach. With thanks to our collaborators on this project. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. All right, and lastly we will hear from Beauchamp, who will talk about predation of salmon and Puget.
Thanks, Laura. You'll notice there's a big gaping hole in some of our information. We know not very much about potential predation, and you'll notice that we don't have avian predation represented here, unfortunately. We're trying to get some folks to participate, and their schedule just didn't allow it. So do realize that we considered that, but we don't have any sort of formal presentation for you on that. So what I'm going to talk about instead is some of the opportunistic information we've developed to look at what the fish predators might be doing on salmon. And I'm going to focus on juvenile salmon predation here. What we have is data published for sea-run cutthroat trout feeding on salmon. The punchline there was that we did the quantification, the predation by sea-run cutthroat trout amounted to probably less than 1% mortality on any given species of salmon. But I will point out that we do have some recurring themes here where the fish that are captured in the gut of the predator are significantly smaller than those that are at large in the population. So again, getting back to that size selective theme, this is true for pink salmon found in the diets of cutthroat trout, also chum salmon and Chinook salmon here, these black bars. And then if we look across the time course of diets, we have smaller cutthroat trout up to 10 inches long in the top panel, and those that are larger in the bottom panel here. Again, not very great sample sizes for this particular year, but do note that we have Chinook salmon showing up during June. This coincides with that period when the Chinook salmon are pulsing into the nearshore environment in Puget Sound. We also have other species of salmon, including Chinook, that do show up in the diet, but to a lesser degree with those smaller cutthroat trout as predators. And then as we get further along, the Chinook and the other salmon tend to leave the nearshore environment and are no longer really available to these nearshore-oriented predators like sea-run cutthroat trout, and the anatomous bull trout also are in that category there. But what we do have is potential overlap with resident forms of the Coho and Chinook salmon that are available in Puget Sound. So I want to show you some information that we've collected for them. On the left here we have the diet composition for different seasons, and again this is opportunistic data that's collected off of the midwater trawling data from the Ricker when it's coming in. And again what we're seeing is we've got salmon showing up, and Chinook is now in red in this case, both in terms of diets for the subadult Chinook salmon and the subadult Coho salmon. By subadult, I'm defining them as these fish that are over 300 millimeters long, but they're not in their adult year out there. So these are fish that we can positively point to as being fish that were resident within Puget Sound. Also note the big contribution of herring throughout. All right, so herring is playing a large role. Again, there was some comment yesterday that we need to recognize economies of scale of answering some questions related to forage fish as well as juvenile salmon simultaneously. There's a lot of opportunity to do that, so we should be exploring that a lot more. Okay, so we've got some evidence of predation that's happening, and it turns out if you try and look at finer scale resolution, there's not any pattern. As the fish get bigger than 300 millimeters long, the diet composition doesn't change measurably. So for convenience, I've pooled all those together. Okay, now some of the critical things to consider now is that when we look at the size distribution of Chinook salmon that we find in Puget Sound, the resident population shows that expected exponential decline with age and size. at any one point. This is a compilation of data from 9 years of midwater trawling. The other things to consider again is that we do have, when we look at the diet of those Chinook prey in the diet of the larger cannibals, that again we see size selective mortality happening. In other words, here's the mean size of the fish that are found in the diets. Here's the mean size and the distribution of those that are found at large in the population during the same periods where we're observing predation. And then to follow up, with salmon predators, and it turns out for many fusiform styles of fish predators, they're capable of eating prey that are up to 50% of their own body length. And so we have the empirical data here for Chinook salmon that are feeding in the nearshore environment and also in the offshore environment. I've circled those regions that have Chinook salmon as the prey in amongst the scatter of other prey that are available in the diet contents there. Okay, and then this dashed line represents that 300 millimeter size threshold that I was using as a convenience there. And typically what we're seeing is as the fish move offshore, they become much more capable predators at about that 300 millimeter size. It seems to be true for salmon predators both in freshwater and the marine environment. Okay, so very back of the envelope calculations here. There's a report in the Pacific Salmon Commission that we submitted a couple of years ago that has this information documented. But what we did was essentially do a scenario of populations of the Chinook salmon that enter Puget Sound as sub-yearlings or ocean types. And from a couple different sources of information, it turns out that roughly 30% of most of these stocks of fish retain a resident life history pattern. So we have a lot of these fish recruiting to this resident life history. And so we're just following these down. So we've got a number of fish that are coming from hatcheries, and then we also try and from backdoor calculations come up with the wild component of the population, so that by the time we get down to these Piscivorous size classes, we have some numbers to work with. And so we've tried to make this transparent so folks could question any one of these assumptions and do their own calculations throughout. The bottom line is that by the time these fish have spent a year in the marine waters, we've got sort of a modal size of 375 millimeters, then 450 and 500 as you go down through these years. And so those are reflected in these peaks here. We can do a size structured analysis using bioenergetics models to come up with a quantification of what their consumption demand was, also integrating that seasonal diet composition information that we had. So I'll show you that information next. On the top, I have these smaller fish below the 300 millimeter size, just to show that they are eating fish, but are not really a significant salmon predator at that stage. But then this middle panel is one that's based on the empirical data that we have so far, which really, as I said before, we've got diet data from July and September. Well, if you think about it, July is a period where the fish have already been out in this open water arena for at least a month or more, and we're likely to underestimate the prey proportions of salmon, which you can barely see in these bars here. Whereas if we look back at the cutthroat trout information, they were feeding upwards of 25% salmon when they were pulsing through their environment. So if we do a simulation that's maybe a more reasonable case, what we've done is say from May and June, when these fish are pulsing through the nearshore environment into the offshore environment, we'll assign 20% of the diet to salmon prey, where in May those will predominantly be pink and chum salmon. In June, July, they'll predominantly be Chinook salmon, again guided by some of the information we had from sea run cutthroat trout. The height of these bars are the overall biomass consumed by this population of resident cutthroat trout. So this is in metric tons on the y-axis here. And so again, lots of herring in the diet throughout all seasons of the year. And then when we look at, Okay, so I've just described those sorts of assumptions that lay into these two scenarios. So the overall consumption rate doesn't change between this middle scenario and the bottom one here. I'm just going to look at the bottom scenario here to give you kind of just a check on what potential might be. So here we've got chum and pink salmon that show up in the diet. In June, it shifts over to Chinook salmon here, and those predation rates equate to about 9 million hatchery plus wild Chinook salmon, roughly, and that would equate to about 50 to 60% of the smolts that enter Puget Sound. Again, using that whole suite of assumptions that I summarized from that previous table. Okay, so anyone can take any number of exceptions to those assumptions, but like I said, they're transparent. And the main point here is just to show that there is the potential for the cannibalism by these larger resident fish to impose a fairly significant source of mortality on these fish overall. So that's all I've got.
Okay, now it's time for us to discuss. We had hypotheses and research recommendations as you heard. So Ken and then Mark. And Nate. Mark. All right. This is on, right? Yes.
Last week, the Code Commission talked about the elephant in the room being warming water and climate change. And first two very fine talks here. And we think there's another elephant in this room, and that is it could be a very appealing management tool to decide on a major coal harvest based on accumulating evidence. And I personally find the thought of that repugnant, and I don't know how other people feel about it, but I think it is something that certainly many other groups in our society would also find unappealing. So I just thought I wanted to put it out there.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. Mark.
I'm not going to comment on that. So we heard about predation, fish predation, and there are other predators too that haven't been discussed at all, which are birds. In the Columbia River, for instance, there's huge colonies of cormorants and terns that are feeding on and eating large quantities of smolt. To what extent are they a driver of mortality in the sales sheet? Just this year we started working with Environment Canada to try to estimate the predation pressure of birds in some of the colonies along the migration corridor of Fisheries, and this year, possibly because there's a lot of smoke coming out of the Fisheries system, those colonies were eating a lot of Fisheries sockeye, not a whole lot of salmon this year for whatever reason. But we can also do a lot of things with the fish that are being brought by the birds because they're being brought whole. We use genetics to find out not just the species, we can identify visually, we can identify the stocks that are feeding on. And you can also look at other characteristics of the fish that are being caught. What are the dead fish looking like? So they're not swimming dead in water, they're just floating dead. So I think we should not forget about those birds. And I don't know to what extent the predation of by birds is important, but most importantly, how variable it is among years, and whether or not it's important that it's significant enough to drive the variability in the survival.
I think we're trying to get someone to talk about birds, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't quite managed it yet. Steve, do you have a response? Yeah.
So in the ecosystem modeling work we've done, one of the factors we include is using Christmas bird count data and colony data from that had been collected by the Frost Species. One thing you notice is that marine bird populations that you would be worried about, like cormorants, elses like ox and ox, these sort of things,
those populations have actually declined dramatically since the 1960s, and again in the late 80s, early 90s, coincidentally enough. And although they do eat a lot, 200 times their body mass per year, I think probably not as big a player as the marine mammals from what we get from the energetics from the model. And one of the big things is because the population has declined so significantly. So it may actually be a perverse concern that if we recover some of those green bird populations, then it could actually become more of a player.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious about what's been done to look at the potential impact of harvest yields on forage fish, like herring. Yesterday, Dave showed a graphic with the age structure for herring and how it's collapsed in recent years. And herring are obviously a very important diet for salmon in the sound, so this indirect food web effect of having this big increase in the harvest yield population seems like another worthwhile avenue to look at.
Yeah, and I'll just comment quickly. I know that Peter Luzik has done some modeling looking at the effects of steel predation on herring. I haven't seen any results from it. Ian Perry might be able to comment on it, or someone else can do so.
Great. Parker.
This is just a comment about those migration patterns that you got from the acoustic transmitters going through the canal, which I think are extraordinary. How you doing that? But the speeds that you find, at least half of that can just be associated with the highly average strength and direction of currents in the surface water are going that same way at comparable speeds. So I don't think you can just interpret it as swimming speeds. Which is probably wrong.
Great. Just a question, I guess, really like Andrew's presentation on the populations of harvest yield. But it looks like they've been falling since like the early 1900s. And so my question is, do we really know what the true population capacity for salmon are? If truly in the 1800s there were 120,000 seals in the area, and maybe we're just trying to, like, do we actually know how many fish were in the waters back then? Because everything I see is basically 1930s on, so there's these huge populations of salmon without any seals, then maybe that's just our artificial carrying capacity.
And unfortunately, I don't have enough gray hair to remember that. But maybe others in the room could fill in some gaps about what used to be there when seals were so abundant.
I know for Coho, they estimated it was about 1 million based on tagging records back in 1890. Trites. I have no idea what the still population was, but the Coho estimate was 1 million Coho in Puget Sound. Free catchery, free everything. But that obviously wasn't big as Coho.
And Brian can comment on the seal abundance as well.
Not the seal, salmon. Yeah, but if you go back to records that the Pacific salmon's predecessor maintained, you were talking about runs to the Fraser of typically 30 to 50 million sockeye, comparable pink salmon. Some numbers are very seldom maintained very well because they weren't a desirable target. And that, but I think it is safe that you're probably talking at least an order of magnitude greater at the turn of the century. So, but before that, no idea, no record.
Okay, so I have Doc, Ramon, and Nikki, Rupert, Ian, Zach, and Dave. Am I missing anyone? Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. So be thinking about it also, taking questions. Remember, we need this information from you.
A comment or a question and a comment with rising intonation. So Andrew, what would it take? I'm assuming that for seal predation, we wouldn't see the size selective behavior that we saw for Piscivorous, for fish predation on juvenils. In other words, the seals would not be eating the smallest out migrants, principally Chinook fry or ocean-type Chinook, if we want to translate that. So, I guess, what would it take to get good predation data and show the kinds of results that they had for fish for harbor seals on juvenile out-migrating Chinook and Coho? And secondly, this is my comment, but quiz about it. When we had really good survival and production of lake release hatchery Chinook that were designed to become resident, that was the strategy, for a long time, and then it fell off. I would have thought that the predation numbers that you were showing, Dave, for Chinook on other Chinook was probably also been occurring. But now we have terrible survival of these captured lake release hatchery fish, and I'm just trying to figure out how predation plays a role in that.
So Andy, you want to start? Yeah.
So first off, the seals are capable of eating the fish of any size. And the first image shows you, a lot of people think they're eating commercial sized fish, but they're eating fish about this big, young every year. Harbor seals can do the same thing, assuming that the density of fish within an area is sufficient to make it worth their while to catch them. And so to get at that, we have to have better insight into every small moving of schools, what are the size of these patches, and we compare that to the patching movement of the fields to determine whether or not we can get a match at the scale. And because the scales of patching is the movement of the scale should match up with the patching of the different trade species. To really address, what size of the action we do, we're doing some of that right now by recovering hard parts in fecal samples. You can measure the ovum, you can reconstruct the size of the fish that are being consumed, and so now it's just a question of getting a proper sampling design so you can be in the right spot at the right time. And to do that most efficiently is a question of pairing up the field biologists with the fish experts and also understand the active movements of the fish and make sure we're not missing that sort of thing. So we took out the technology to do it. Really it's a question of funds and
Okay, Brandon. Loretta is next.
Just a quick comment on the birds. There's a 14-year data set that's released on the common news. It's really informative, showing about 10% predation on juvenile salmon. When the preferred prey sources, myriads of course, are less available in system. So there's a colonial dynamic between species. Also, I had a question for Andrew. How are you going to tease out the other 90% of the prey if you GPS track forming behavior on fish? So if 8% of us are eating salmon, and most of the time your data is coming back showing preying on all of their European species, how do you tease out what they're seeing from your data set?
I'm not sure that I really understood your question properly, but in terms of the diet work.
Well, you're going to have a GPS track of fields doing their thing in the daytime, but a lot of the time they're not feeding on salmon. So how are you, your risk matrix, how do you show that they're actually feeding on salmon rather than feeding on other fish?
A lot of that, so from the movement data, looking at the daily diary type thing, we're recording things down a fraction of a second, so we can reconstruct the tortuosity of the movement and the whole search pattern. So in order for us to interpret it, it's a question of working with people who understand fish behavior, who've done a acoustic survey. So at Bering Sea, we have very talented from Oregon State University, and they were able to get right down to the structure of the smaller patches, spacing between individuals and the size of the beans, and we could essentially it's like putting a hand in a glove that she just fits perfectly. It takes finally the same sort of thing with an integrated research program, having those that understand the salmon, but probably other components of an ecosystem too. We're going to address some of the things that David brought up, and you have to look at other fish, the snowflake fish. some other things. So it's going to take more than just one salmon virus and one seal virus. It will be a team of people. But I think we can put these different pieces together to understand how this system is functioning. And we're the true combination.
I just, when we talk about collaborative transboundary research being shared, I think, I know this is subject to predation and we're looking just at that subject, but I'm just very aware during the discussions that we're not looking at habitat, we're not looking at biodiversity. So that, questions such as if the salmon were eating, the seals were only eating salmon in the 80s, about 4% of their diet, and that's increased to 80%. Could some of that be due to lack of other species and the habit of fishing practices that decrease biodiversity? At the same time, we're not looking at habitat. So the loss of habitat, the abundance of, or the lack of phosphorus, grass, etc. So when we look at subjects as predation, and we're looking at research opportunities, I think we should stop looking at these things in a linear way and just go feast on the abundance of information that we could share and look at this in a much more integrated ecosystem approach.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yes.
The whole purpose of this workshop here is that we were trying to fill a gap that was noticeable. I think there's lots of other parties that are focused almost exclusively on habitat. And so what we're trying to do is fill in around the edges. So we're trying to not bog down the attention for this particular workshop in something that gets a lot of attention in other places. So it's not that we don't appreciate the importance of that. We're trying to fulfill this complementary role instead.
Yeah, Nikki kind of stole my thunder there, because that was exactly what I was going to say. Is that like the Sunless River, there's a bridge there that may or may not be contributing to that predation by the seals, but that estuary has also been tremendously simplified and channelized. There's no cover for those fish coming out of there, and who knows whether a hatchery release strategy where a lot of those fish are all coming out at the same time contributes as well. So I think that I guess what I hope is going to come fairly soon is the strategies to not just assess what the level of predation or whatever other impact we're looking at is, but how do we sort of start to assess what those different factors are, how they're interacting, like habitat and predation, and are there ways, getting to the point of action too, like what could we actually do short of the call with pen. So I think clearly there's not an appetite in the public for that kind of thing. So we have to really understand how we could, what we could do that would make the salmon less susceptible to predation if that is an issue. And I just wanted to sort of close with an observation that the transient killer whales were mentioned, and we talked with sports fishermen in the northern strait of Georgia 5 years ago. They probably lost 1 out of every 2 Chinook to seals, taking them off their line, and that the transient whales have been far more prevalent in the last few years, and now it's become actually a rare occurrence. So, they're eating them, but they're also changing their behavior, and maybe there's a lesson there for us as well, that there are ways that we can alter their behavior or alter those interactions and achieve some of what we want to.
Ian.
So I was just going to make a quick comment. Nate asked about seals and herring, and Andrew asked if anybody knows or was mentioned that Peter Electric is a Pacific Biological Station and some ocean interaction. Peter has found he's been studying the predation of seals, including on herring. In the 1970s, when seals were low and herring were high, there wasn't much impact. Not surprisingly now, when seals are high and herring are lower, there's a more important impact. But I think the most interesting thing is that Peter's analysis is suggesting that, in fact, seals may be part of the reason for the declining size and age of herring, in that seals seem to peel off or pick off the bigger fish. Now, that doesn't explain it entirely, but it's kind of an interesting aspect or potential for explaining some of the size of each thing.
Great, great. Dave is next, and then Rusty, and then we'll try them. Dave, there's my line.
Okay, I guess this is for both Barry and Andrew. Especially Barry, you showed the scenes of the steelhead, I guess, moving out. But I'm wondering, for both of you had accumulations of the seals moving around, what kind of distance do they travel in a day? I mean, we talked about patches, but they seem to be going quite ways away from where they're staying. And I also wondering, is there any activity at night?
Yeah, so the seals are definitely home bodies. They tend to be regular hollow sites. And they tune, and some of the other cages that they suggest that they're traveling within about a 20-kilometer radius. The higher predation rate is probably only going to be close to the wheel, and less as they go out. And that's some of the things that were put into that simulation rather than doing an assumption about how far from shore they are going. So the things that can be adjusted, and the final resolution gave them a good moving analysis.
I would say that one of the things that kind of got us thinking about this potential interaction is if we just look at a map, kind of like what Andy showed, of the haul-out locations of this canal, Puget Canal, illustrate, and then you look along the coast, those coastal populations, which exhibit these fluctuations, they swim past one or maybe two haul-outs, on the way to the ocean, and a southern canal population is going to swim past, I don't remember what the number is, 25 or 30. It's fairly narrow one.
Is there any predation at night? Any predation activity at night?
Well, I have no idea.
There's a show there's predation activity at night. And, it's native marine mammals, since they can get into deeper water, they would wait for that low gathering to come up to the surface. And so you can often see in the dive patterns, those that are not vegetated, but more different water standards. And as the sun starts to go down, deep dives to get shallower and shallower, and then start going straight down.
And then what's the prey breakdown in that situation? Is it the same what you see during the daytime? Because I know when we've done some night work in the state of Georgia, the juvenile salmon really disappeared from the surface waters. I think they're probably moving real close to shore.
Yeah, and that'd be something we can look at. I was quick been looking at the posters by the team over here, some of those deep water species, which some of them are phenomenally high quality prey. And I'd like to look back at some of our dietary species to see what kind of overlap might be there. That could be a more important source than what all people do.
Thanks. Okay. We have about 1 minute. But just, I'd like to call your attention to the questions on the screen. We've been doing a good job of asking questions about hypotheses and the research. This seems to me like a place where you were saying the collaboration might be valuable. Is that true? Yes. Okay. Any resources that we can take advantage of that haven't been mentioned? We have a vote or people to collaborate with. Anything that these guys didn't say already that really needs to be said? Christopher.
I have a technical question. These tag lines are pretty expensive to maintain. Can they be put on ferries and so combined with GPS reading, which would cover a larger area? Is there something that we could work towards facilitating that?
I think there are a number of creative ways that you can get receivers out there, with more regional attaching to the predators themselves. So, what I don't know is about the technical aspects and the acoustic noise generated by the ferries and whether or not that would interfere with the detection ranges. But I think that's something that ought to be looked into and folks understand that a bit better. I know that Jan mentioned they're attached to gliders now from time to time, and I think there are a number of creative ways to do that.
Great. Thanks. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much to our panelists. Appreciate it.